back, everybody, to the Fantasy Golf Bag podcast. I am your host, Redkacheek, and this week we will be previewing the Texas Children's Houston Open. Last week was the Valspar to finish off the Florida Swing, so a fun, eventful, honestly, for Hovland, his stretch of golf the last month and even into last year, for him to be going through so much with swing changes and switching coaches mentally, and then he wins. It just it's crazy to me. Pretty good golf course. I mean, honestly, Copperhead is a golf course that can kind of hide some weaknesses off the tee. Around the green, I would say no, but there is, some longer rough that if you're struggling chipping from tight lies, then yes, you can kind of get away with some misses that end up in the right spot. The ball sits up a little bit higher off the ground. It's just sitting kind of midway in the rough, and you can kind of hit a blast shot. It's not really that tough. So, I mean, trying to justify his win there versus how bad he's been, it really rewards iron play, which is typically his strong suit anyway. So, yeah, not too surprising, but a great leaderboard. Xander showed up, had a really good week outside of 2 holes on Saturday, which you'll see reflected in our Spectrum data. But he hit one left on 10 and had to chip out sideways, and hit one left on 11 and had to hit he hit a provisional. The second ball was in play, so he had to play a second tee shot. He basically hit it out of bounds. It was a lost ball or something. So, and then Justin Thomas obviously continues to play well at Valspar. So, yeah, we're almost in the meat of it with the Masters right around the corner. So I will go ahead and we'll just jump into the Houston Open. And honestly, we got a lot of fun events coming up. So, yeah, we won't waste much time. So let's try to knock this out in 35, 40 minutes at the most. This is a solo show. I'm going to try to get some guests for the Masters and obviously some other events coming up after the Masters. But hopefully the Masters, we can have a nice full show with me, another guest, and maybe a third guest. So we'll see how that goes. So let's go ahead and jump into it. All right. We are going to walk through, just like every week, we're going to walk through the Course Preview Pro, get a good kind of layout of this golf course. It's very unique compared to what we've seen the last couple weeks. Looking through it on Sunday night, I flipped, I'm manually moving everything over as of now. So like for the pro members, eventually you'll be able to just kind of jump to any event and look through the Course Preview Pro. But for now, just for like maintenance sake, I'm controlling when we kick over to the next event. So usually on Saturday or Sunday, occasionally if it's a big event like the Players, I did it on Friday. But yeah, you'll see very different than what we've seen the last couple weeks in Florida. So take that for good or bad. The Memorial Park Golf Course, the last 5 winners, Stefan Jaeger, Tony Finau, Jason Kokrak, and Carlos Ortiz. The average winning score, about 12.5 under par. Average cut line, 1 over par. This is a par 70, 7,435 yards. Greens we have listed as Bermuda, but I saw someone in Discord, and I will give them a shout really quick. This comes from the PGA Tour, but sometimes what's listed there is not updated according to the superintendent, which is funny. So, shout out to Snow Shark in the Discord. He says the greens are POA overseed instead of Bermuda. So take that for what it's worth. I think that doesn't move too much for me. I wasn't going to look up Bermuda splits anyways, but he's probably just kind of dissuading people from looking at Bermuda specifically because that's a little bit misleading due to the overseed. So average par 3, 191 yards, average par 4, 469, and average par 5, 596. So pretty average, I would say. The par 4s as an average of 470 is probably a little bit on the long side. Average par 5, 596 is probably right around average. So all in all, pretty standard golf course. It is a par 70, so it's kind of long for the par 70, but I would say this is pretty much a average length golf course. Par fives are the scoreable holes. There's a few par fours. You can see number 5 and number 13. So looking here on the right-hand side, you can see number 3, number 8, excuse me, number 16, the par fives play under par, and even 16 doesn't play that much under par, which is interesting. How long is 16? Let's go look. 16 is interesting, 576. It's not that long. And I'm blanking on the hole itself, but yeah, definitely a lower scoring par 5 than we typically see for par 5s. You can see hole 3 is almost a half a shot under par, being a little bit generous there. And hole 8's kind of in the same ballpark. So like this golf course, like I mentioned as we started the show, it's very different than what we saw the last few weeks in Florida. So like just to recap really quickly, we have some stats on this fairway penalty, driving distance penalty. And if you saw essentially every week, if you think back to Honda, I'm just going to keep calling it Honda. The Cognizant Classic is just too much of a mouthful. It's hard to peg that name every time. So the Honda Classic, and then the Players, Arnold Palmer, and then Valspar, you'll see that like the priorities there were getting it in play off the tee, not hitting it in the rough, because the rough penalty was pretty high. The greens typically are really firm. We saw that at Bay Hill and the Players for sure. And it was even that way a little bit at the Honda, except for they had the ryegrass overseed and the rough was cut down a little bit. So it wasn't as penalizing. So, but definitely the Players and Bay Hill, when you see a missed fairway penalty pretty high and you see a driving distance penalty around average or high, that really puts an emphasis on good drives, like literally getting it in the fairway. You can't play from the rough. This is like a completely opposite event. When you look through these numbers, which we'll talk through, it's like this is like a recreational type of golf course when you think about it. So let's go ahead and just dive right into it. So like the two big pieces for me when I look through this: driving distance, there's buckets, we'll talk about that, and driving accuracy, we'll talk about that. But missed fairway penalty is 0.1 shots down from the tour average at 0.26. So basically, you missing the fairway is only going to cost you a quarter of a shot, and that's on average. I mean, that like includes people that are really going through it out there and missing the fairway and making double bogey. So like 0.26, like quarter of a shot is very, very low. I think at Bay Hill, it was almost half a shot. So like, it feels like we're splitting hairs here, but when we're trying to look at a golf course for an overall field, a quarter of a shot is much different than half of a shot, especially for 150 guys. Distance penalty is down. So like, there's not a lot of distance penalty. So even that is, you could kind of go two ways with that. Distance penalty to me would be if it's high, there's a demand for distance off the tee. I think there is a demand for distance off the tee here, but I think there's also everybody's mostly hitting it to the same spot, which we'll look at in just a second. So the missed fairway penalty was the one that stood out the most to me. And then just trying to like piece it all together. Driving distance is down. Driving accuracy is way down. So like when I see the driving accuracy way down, I immediately, even without the missed fairway penalty, I can start to get a picture in my head that the guys do not care at all about hitting fairways. Unlike we saw at, Bay Hill or the Players Championship. Pretty tough approaches. So we look at proximity to the hole is 43.5 feet. It's about 4 feet above the tour average. Green regulation percent is 4% lower than the tour average at 61%. Even green regulation from the fairway and the rough. We'll look at the approaches. I mean, a lot of that is just the approach shots coming into here. But green regulation from the fairway is down 6%. Green regulation from the rough is down 4%. So honestly, it's more difficult relative to the PGA Tour average from the fairway than the rough. Again, goes to my point that the rough just doesn't matter here. Or I should say hitting fairways doesn't matter here. We're just going to be looking for guys that are driving it, above average to the field, distance-wise. So the other stats I don't really care to talk about: birdie or better, bogey or worse. Honestly, for the sake of a preview, doesn't really matter to me. For like our projections, that's a huge factor. But I mean, I'm not one to look at. Hopefully, if you've been around fantasy golf bag over the last couple of years, or even specifically the last couple months, when you look at like the lead-in stats, you'll see that like the birdie or better and bogey or worse doesn't matter. Like it's so relative to the fields and the courses that they played coming into that event. If we're going to go to um, the American Express and we're going to go play La Quinta Country Club, and it's like, yeah, we need guys that are going to make a lot of birdies. Well, guess what? If they just played the Farmers, they didn't make a lot of birdies. So it really matters on what golf courses those players have played, what events and what fields. So I'm not a big fan of looking at that as like a stat per se. For Showdown, possibly, but like I said, it does matter for our projections. But like if I'm going to go, we'll look at the stat model later. I'm not going to plug in birdie or better. Like it literally doesn't matter. We see guys. I'll just hop down here. I mean, honestly, birdie or better, bogey or worse are above average for Finau and Jaeger. They were below for Kokrak. Bogey or worse was actually better for Carlos Ortiz, and birdie or better was down. Like it just doesn't really mean too much to me. It's going into the event lead-in wise isn't gonna move the needle. So let's talk about the specific driving buckets. Before we do that, I guess you could look at this chart on the left. So this is our radar chart for the strokes gained by position. So we got winner, top 10, and top 25, and then those that made the cut. And you can see this skews quite a bit. We just talked about the missed green and regulation, green and regulation percent being so low. So guys missing a lot of greens in regulation. You can see that the approach for the winner is quite a bit higher. You can see that the approach for top 10 and top 25 is much, much higher than the guys that made the cut. And then when you go over to the side, interestingly enough, around the green is reverse, like it's an anti-correlation. But putting is definitely going to be a factor here. So you can see a nice spread between the guys that made the cut, gained about 1 stroke putting. The guys in the top 25 gained about 2.7 strokes putting. Top 10, almost 4 strokes putting. And the winner over the last 4 years, gained 7.5 strokes putting. So yeah, you're gonna have to look through the stats we'll talk about, and hopefully the guys that we play, one of them finds the hot putter and can cruise to a nice lead on Sunday. It's kind of frustrating when you see that, to be honest, but it is what it is. Memorial Park. So driving distance distribution. So like I said, the driving distance is down slightly off of the tour average. Driving accuracy is down quite a bit off the tour average. So where are the guys driving it? We have 1 tee shot between 230 and 250, and we have 12 between 290 and 310. So basically, they're hitting drivers on 12 of 13 tee shots, which is massive. If you remember the last week or the weeks, the Players Championship, it was basically, I think, like at most 4 tee shots, 290 to 310, maybe 6 if we count. If I'm thinking back to the Players, so very, 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 very big difference between this event and the last few in Florida. So 290 to 310 is massive. Now, someone did ask, like, because we have the driving IQ tool, typically the driving IQ tool for me would be like when we get a weird event like the Honda Classic with a lot of drives in a specific bucket that are different than hitting drivers, like 250 to 270, 230 to 250. I need to know specifically, strokes gained off the tee is just not going to take that into account. I mean, it's weighted to those holes a little bit. But I really need to know, if there's a bunch of tee shots between 250 and 270, that's not a driver. I want to know what these guys have been doing specifically for that driving distribution. This week is different. 290 to 310, just off the tee, strokes gained off the tee. There's not a big driving distance penalty, but sure, like you can look at return to par score on those holes with those drives. You can look at, actually, we'll look at it here in just a second, but you could throw down missed fairway penalty low. That's probably a really good idea. We'll see what the sample size is, because honestly, the last few events, it's been medium or high. But that's if stumbling there. If if you're going to look at driving IQ for this week, which it has its benefits, I probably wouldn't be as excited to use it this week because it's just a bunch of drivers. I can find that in Stat Model Pro, just looking at strokes gained off the tee, to be honest. But if I wanted to kind of be a nit and look at it a little bit deeper, then yeah, I would pull in 290 to 310, and I would just be looking at strokes gained off the tee for each of those tee shots and see guys that are excelling a little bit more so on those type of holes. So again, most golf courses have a spread. You could probably lean into it, but we'll pull it up here in just a second. Actually, I'll help kind of guide on what I would look at with these tools. All right, approach distance distribution really spread out here. There's quite a lot: 150 to 175, over 23%. What is that? 23%. Yeah. Over 200 plus, we got 27% of shots, but there's a nice even split: 50 to 125, 125 to 150, 175 to 200. So again, kind of boring in terms of like researching it because I would want to look at almost all the buckets. I think this would be one of those weeks where, if someone's being lazy and they can just look at strokes gained approach, it's probably a pretty good indication of how they're going to do this week for the most part. There's not one or two buckets that really stand out. So I'll still use approach IQ. I like to use it every week. It's not, not really the same thing as the driving distance distribution where strokes gained off the tee is just an easier number. Approach for sure. Like I can probably get a better idea of guys that don't suck at 200 plus or 150 to 175, etc. So there is a benefit, even though it's pretty spread out, which you can see that, down here. Basically, 150 to 175 and 125 to 150 are slightly above the average PGA Tour course, and all the rest are below the tour course. But they're really close, to be honest. I mean, we're talking like, 2 to 3% or something like that. All right, so we kind of glossed over the lead-in stats. I'm not going to spend too much time here. We only have 4 winners, anyways, and to be honest, it's kind of all over the place. I think the one takeaway is like the odds favorites look to do pretty well here. If we look at Jaeger, he was 50 to 1. Finau was 16 to 1. Kokrak was 48 to 1. All those guys were priced on DraftKings 8,800 or higher. Ortiz is kind of the oddball out. Now, if you remember, he won against Poulter in a playoff. I think it was a playoff. So, 150 to 1, 6,700, first event here. I don't want to throw it out, but I'm not really that concerned with the lead-in stats here in general. I kind of have a good idea of the golf course. It's driver heavy. I need guys to be driving it, at least gaining off the tee in that 290 to 310 bucket. But there's not a big demand for driving accuracy, so I'm not worried about guys missing fairways. I do want guys on approach. Honestly, 3 of the 4 were gaining on approach leading into this event. So it's just kind of a bizarre event, and only with 4 winners. We could look at the time machine and go back further. I think I actually did that. Let's just go hop to it really quick. So if you go to the time machine, this will pull up. You can look at top 10, top 5, top 25 for each of those last couple years. So like I did glance through this on Sunday night. One of the things that stood out to me the most was guys gaining off the tee, approach a little bit, and then driving distance. So like, it's hard to gain off the tee without any substantial driving distance relative to the field, but like you can still do it. Like Jim Furyk, if he's playing a golf course that really demands accuracy, he could gain off the tee hitting it 275. But you could see here, like last year, all these guys were losing in driving accuracy. Makes sense. Like it didn't matter at this golf course. Driving distance was way up outside of Aaron Rye. Strokes gained off the tee was up. Approach was up. Around the green was up. I don't really care about that. But we can go back to like 23. And you can see a little bit more spread out. There's a few guys in here losing off the tee. But all in all, in the top 10, we'll say over half were gaining off the tee, and about 60% were gaining in driving distance. So, and again, you can go back to each year and start to get a look at driving distance and strokes gained off the tee. So definitely a way to look at past fields, not just the winner. All right. Real quickly, we'll talk through course history and then we'll talk through driving IQ, approach IQ, and stat model. We'll try to get some winners out of those groups. So only played 4 years. So if we look at guys in the field with the most top 25s, we'll do top 25s. All right, we got Scotty Scheffler, great. Aaron Rye, Tony Finau, Mackenzie Hughes. He actually has 3 top 25s, and he's got 3 of those are top 16s. Pretty good. Got Jason Day. Stefan Jaeger's had a pretty good run here with his win last year in a T9 in 2023. And then kind of a mixed bag. Smalley and Damon missed cuts last year, but had really good results prior to that. T15 and T4 for Smalley, T5, T9 for Damon, and then they both missed the cut last year. So kind of interesting. As far as top 10s, let's look. Yeah, just Scheffler, T2, T9, T2. Aaron Rye, Tony Finau, Stefan Jaeger, Joel Damon, Jason Day. And then Thomas Dietrich has only played here once and had a T2 last year. Grieserman only played here once, had a T7 last year as well. So, again, only 4 years of results for these guys. It's hard to really get an idea, except for if you're good at golf like Scotty Scheffler, then it's probably expected that that's gonna continue. All right, let's talk about driving IQ. Let's hop there first. All right. So you guys should be familiar with this tool a little bit by now, but like you can have all the different driving distance buckets. This week with so many 290 to 310, I'll unselect 270 to 290. I just want 290 to 310. I'm not going to mess with the missed fairway penalty or distance penalty yet. Let's just get a look at it. So like for me, driving distance, maybe there's something to be said for looking at driving distance on those holes. But I think strokes gained off the tee is as good or better in this sense when we're just looking at one bucket. And obviously driving accuracy, I don't care about. Green regulation, probably. It should be pretty correlated with strokes gained off the tee, but doesn't always work out like Spawn here. So like strokes gained off the tee in this bucket, 290 to 310, Rico Hoey, Scotty Scheffler, Keith Mitchell, Isaiah Salinda, Taylor Pendrith, Harris English, Lanto Griffin, and then Padraig Harrington with small sample size. So honestly, that's a pretty good list when we start to go down it. You can also filter. You can also filter on like good return to par scores. That's not a bad idea. Jeremy Paul leads the way. Scotty Scheffler second. Alex Smalley again. Harris English, Ricky Castillo, Adam Schenk, Keith Mitchell. So like honestly, when you start to look through these buckets, like Keith Mitchell checks all of them. That's really interesting. Jeremy Paul, that's pretty good sample size. He got 62 holes played at 290 to 310. And he's leading in green regulation. He's leading in return to par. So, and then Scotty's just being Scotty, top 4 in 3 of those categories. But yeah, that's how I would use driving IQ this week. And then what you do is you just kind of filter through the stats and then just kind of favorite the guys that pop, maybe the top 10 in each. And then when you go to the stat model, you can remember, which guys were the best performers in that driving distance bucket. Now, I will say, I haven't clicked this yet, so we'll see. So, like, let's consider the missed fairway penalty low. If we want to look at return to par, that's where I would probably use return to par the most. The sample size goes down quite a lot. Like I said, the last few events, the missed fairway penalty has been high or at best medium. But this is where return to par on 290 to 310 tee shots and the missed fairway penalty is low. Basically, you're assuming, well, you're not assuming. Basically, the field told you that the rough penalty was low. Like there wasn't a penalty for missing the rough. The guys that lead the way there, Schenk shows up again, but we got Isaiah Salinda, who I just mentioned, Nicholas Norgard, Justin Lauer, Tim Whiting, Alex Smalley again, great. Jeremy Paul, Nikolai Hogard, Andrew Novak, and Trevor Cohn. So that's how you would start to kind of tweak this model a little bit to maybe see guys. again, the sample size is small. That's my biggest concern, just because there's hasn't been a lot of missed fairway penalties or low missed fairway penalties in the last couple weeks. You can go back like in the last 12 months. I don't love that just because I want to know more more near term form, if that makes sense. Like, driving is somewhat cyclical. There's good drivers for sure, but definitely there's times during the year where they're not driving at the best. Like Keith Mitchell's a great driver, but there's definitely months during the year or a few events during the year where he doesn't drive it well for whatever reason. He's not hitting it well, or the course doesn't suit his eye. There's just ways that happen. So I don't like looking back too far, but you do see a bigger sample size. But there's some wild names. You got Jackson Suber, Takumi Kanaya, Nicholas Norgard, Davis Thompson, Stefan Jaeger, Scotty Scheffler, so a little bit more normal. But yeah, there's ways you can tweak it. For me, I think just be standard 290 to 310. Look back over the last 8 or 12 events, and let's see who's gaining the most off the tee in that distance bucket, or return to par is high or green regulations high. That's the best way to do it. All right, we'll do approach IQ real quick, and then we'll hop into the stat model. So it's interesting. So there's so many buckets to kind of look through. We have an update coming for approach IQ. It was pushed yesterday, but we found a bug in it, so I retracted it and going to try to push it today, being Tuesday, March 25th. But basically, you'll be able to weight each of those buckets your own custom weighting. So like right now we have 4 buckets open, 4 buckets we're looking at for proximity. And obviously I would use strokes gained approach. We'll use so 125 to 150 on up to 200 to 225 strokes gained approach. And then you would be able to weight, Scotty Scheffler's approaches for each of those buckets however you want, 20%, 125 to 150. If you want to match the distribution for the golf course, that's totally fine. And then 30% for 200 to 225, 25% for 150 to 175. You could basically just kind of customize an overall ranking. That way you don't have to just kind of keep glancing through everybody and just look for green. So that's coming. Look for that later today. But yeah, for me, I would also use all shots instead of fairway. There's not a big penalty for missing the fairway. So I don't mind using primary rough, intermediate rough, fairway bunker. Doesn't matter to me. Just show me who's hitting it the best from each of those distances. All right. Let's hop into the stat model, and then let's give out some winners, and then we'll close out this video and podcast, I guess. Podcast. All right. So, as you saw last week, and honestly the last few weeks, Spectrum data has been a huge value as far as determining who's playing the best, not just gaining the most strokes. And again, to recap, I need to post a new Spectrum video. But strokes gained is aggregate. So a good example is Xander last Saturday. He played very well, pretty much all week. Definitely with his irons, but he drove the ball pretty well. But last Saturday, he made the turn, got to 10, hit a drive left. It's mainly trees, but I guess his shot was blocked out, so he had to go sideways. He lost over half a shot there off the tee, which is probably what he had gained up to that point on that golf course. So basically in one hole, one shot, lost everything he gained. Then the next hole, he hit a bad tee shot. He did. He hit a tee shot left. He had to hit a provisional for a lost ball or OB. He lost almost 2 strokes off the tee on that one. Again, a bad tee shot, that contributes to your tournament. You gain less off the tee in the tournament. But again, considering he gained strokes on the other 8 tee shots, I want to know that he's been gaining on more shots than one bad tee shot. We see that with approach. I'm sure if you go look at some ugly scorecards at the Players Championship on 17 at Sawgrass, there's some guys that probably lost 4 strokes on approach on that one hole. And again, from a tournament perspective, that's accurate, right? Like, how did you finish 30th? Well, I gained off the tee. I lost 8 strokes on approach. That's how you finish where you finished. But when we're looking at going ahead, what are you going to do next week? Well, the 4 strokes he lost, you couldn't gain 4 strokes in 3 rounds, like gaining a stroke around on the PGA Tour on approach is really good. 2 is fantastic, 3 is just absurd. So basically you could lose an entire tournament's worth of strokes gained approach on one hole. And from a betting perspective and DFS perspective, it's just not fair. So all that's to say, one, I need to remind myself to provide a new Spectrum update video. But Spectrum data is definitely going to be a value for the next couple events as we go into it. So this is the Redkacheek's model. This is pretty straightforward. It's got strokes gained stats and Spectrum stats. So basically you can kind of compare both side by side. It has relative green regulation, proximity, birdie or better, bogey or worse. So just an overall look at it. And then let's do last 12 events is fine. Last 24 rounds is fine. Let's see if we want any other filters. Probably not. Yeah, I'm not big on getting down into the nitty gritty. Like it's available for you if you want to look at specific pars, par 70, par 71, course yard. But again, like you're hitting the same shots. The golf course doesn't really change that. Course, I'm not going to update course or wind or anything like that. So yeah, so let's do a weighted ranking. Strokes gain, I'm going to use some strokes gain just to kind of keep a buffer. So let's do strokes gain off the tee, or strokes gain tee to green, 15%. Strokes gained off the tee, another 15%. We got 10% for strokes gained approach. Spectrum off the tee, we'll do 15%. Spectrum approach, 20%. So we're at 75% total. Green and regulation, definitely want to look at that. So let's do 20% there. We got 5% left. Let's do, we'll add it to strokes gained approach just to give a little bit more of a leniency there. So yeah, that looks good, 100%. So we'll let that run. So this is kind of where it ranks out. Yeah, I like this. So you can see here, like Davis Thompson, strokes gained approach is 77th in this field over the last 12 events, but he's 140th in Spectrum. Like Spectrum gives him a knockdown. Sung Jae is about the same, but it's a nice way for me at least to go side by side. You can even move this around so we can have strokes gained off the tee right next to each other with Spectrum and on down the line. So, all right. Let's just talk through it really quickly. So we have 2 guys over 10K. Scotty Scheffler, Rory McIlroy. In this specific run, I hate to call it a model because we're not modeling much. It's just pulling stats and aggregating. But for sake of clarity and simplicity, we'll call it a model. Scotty Scheffler, Rory McIlroy, 1-2 in this custom model. Scotty's numbers look great all across the board. Rory's numbers look pretty good too. Interesting for Rory is his Spectrum off the tee is much, much lower. So that would be something I would, make a note of, go into the driving IQ and see if that off the tee number is maybe reflective of a different bucket than the 290 to 310 that he'll see this week. JJ Spawn also grades out really well at 9,900. So as we go down to, that was real quick, but that's basically the 3 guys right off the board, Scotty Scheffler, Rory, and JJ Spawn, that check all the boxes we just looked at with strokes gained and Spectrum, which is, the most important things to me. Let's see here. As we go down into the 9K range, Aaron Rai also has some good course history. 9,800 ranks pretty well in all those categories. Again, Spectrum off the tee is negative compared to strokes gained, so that's worth looking into a little bit more. And super simple. I would just go check these guys, and then I can go into driving IQ and filter on my favorites and then dive in a little bit deeper. So we'll skip over the 9K range in general. Minwoo Lee, I do like him here. Doesn't grade out well, mainly because of his approach game. Davis Thompson, Spectrum approach, hates him. Sung JM really has been bad, and I don't think I'm going to play him until he turns something around. I got lucky; he made the cut at the Players Championship. Very lucky. I think I had like 40% Sung JM, and that was honestly a mistake. Should not have done that. It was like 10x the field. He hasn't been playing that well, but long-term form, he got jammed in, and I should have just manually knocked him down. That was poor, but I got lucky. He made the cut and got most of my entry fees back for the Millie Maker. Tony Finau grades out pretty well. Nothing popping per se, but definitely average or above average in all the different, off the tee and Spectrum approach. So that would be one I would look to. Tony Finau at 9,200. Jason Day looks okay. Spectrum off the tee gives him a bump down. Again, I would be checking that box and looking at him. And then in the 8K range, we got a couple guys that are actually grade out better than the 9K. We got Siwoo Kim, Michael Kim, Taylor Pendrith, Jacob Bridgman, and Alex Smalley. Smalley with a good week. The last couple weeks, honestly, he's been playing really good golf. So I think Smalley's interesting. Pendrith, when we consider off the tee being such a big factor here, that's his strength. Honestly, his off the tee game is probably one of the best on tour. Probably just second behind Rory. Yeah, he's second in strokes gained off the tee in this sample behind Rory. So Taylor Pendrith on this golf course, sign me up. Michael Kim, the same thing. I'll reiterate what I said after Bay Hill. I was impressed. He had a good start at the Players, ended up missing a 3-footer or 4-footer on 17 on Friday, missed the cut, and then kind of snuck in last week. So Michael Kim ranked 7th in those weights that we just pushed. I think you stay on him, 8,700. He drives the ball really well. So sign me up for Michael Kim. Siwoo Kim as well, pretty good off the tee. Approach is lacking, but I think he's a good price, 8,900. Overall, tee to green regulation looks pretty good. All right, 7K range. Let's just pick out the guys that kind of look the best. We got Nick Taylor at 7,500. Off the tee is his weakness, but I don't think it's a terrible negative. His irons are so good. He's top 5 in Spectrum. He's 5th in Spectrum approach, 2nd in strokes gained approach, 7th in strokes gained tee to green. Spectrum off the tee, again, this would be a driving IQ question. I would take it to the driving IQ tool and look up 290 to 310 and see if Nick Taylor's been, much shorter. That's one way you can look at this, much shorter than the field average from that bucket, or maybe he's gaining less strokes off the tee in that bucket, and that's a weakness. Maybe you would X him out. That would be pretty good leverage on the field, knowing that. But looking at it from this, he grades out really well in his approach play. But I do think that's your edge when you start to consider the multiple aspects of like this golf course, and 290 to 310 is such a key distance off the tee. Maybe if you find guys that check a lot of boxes, but not checking the driving, X them out. That's a good way to, because most people are just going to look, literally for me, I guarantee you, majority of the people you're playing against will go run something like this. They'll say, oh, wow, Nick Taylor's top 10 in this field. I'm going to play him. Well, let's hold on a second. Let's see why he's top 10. Oh, his approach play has been so good. You think back, okay, the Players Championship, driving distance wasn't a big factor. Bay Hill, yes and no, but irons were a bigger factor. Honda Classic, irons were a bigger factor. Like there's just so many ways you got to kind of dive in to gain an edge, and it's an easy edge if you just take the extra 5 minutes. So definitely would consider, recommend looking at guys like him, especially when you see a glaring weakness off the tee. Go see why. Go see which bucket it's coming from, and then see if that fits this week. Maybe it doesn't. Maybe he's really losing 250 to 270, and okay, well that doesn't matter. 290 to 310, he's even better. You know what I mean? Like there's a lot of different ways to get an edge when you start looking through the tools. We got Kevin Yu. He ranks 5th, very good across the board. I like that. Joe Highsmith is playing really good golf. Another good finish last week. Jake Knapp surprises me. I don't think he's been able to take advantage of his off the tee game. the last couple events. So this would be a nice spot. He still grades out pretty well. His irons have been so good, but I'm hoping maybe he comes in a little bit lower. I would be very interested in having Jake Knapp in a lot of lineups, considering the profile of this golf course fits his profile pretty well. Keith Mitchell kind of glanced over at 8K, also one of those guys. Interestingly enough, he's a green regulation rate's really high. Strokes gained off the tee is really high. Spectrum off the tee high. His approach numbers are basically average. So pretty good. Pretty good. We got Ben Griff and Taylor Moore. So a good list there in the 7K range, to be honest. Max McGreevy, Nikolai Hogard to kind of round out the low 7K range. And then Rico Hoey, which we talked about on the driving IQ, and Joel Damon as well. Now, I will say, Doug Gim should pop for a lot of people, but his putting is a concern. So, it's you want to kind of stick to a process every week that you can maintain and almost like blindly follow it every week. But it is, there is differences to the golf course. And like I said, we're looking at guys that are gaining a ton with their approach and not with off the tee. We need to take an extra step. That could be part of your process, just like a branch off to look at those distance buckets. But like Doug Gim, dude, you can't be losing 5 strokes and 7 strokes putting and be a good play. So until Doug Gim kind of figures it out with the putter, I think that's just a really it's a red flag for me. Maybe it turns around and it flips, and I'll miss out, but I'm fine, because otherwise people are playing him at like 12% or 10%, and they shouldn't. There's just more to it than just looking at his approach play, which is good. I'll admit his approach play looks good, but yeah, if you're going to be 3-putting 2 or 3 times around and you're not making any of your 6-footers and in, yeah, that's not playable in my opinion. All right, into the 6K range. Isaiah Salinda at 7K is the last honorable mention. Really good off the tee. Approach is mediocre, but definitely worth considering how good he drove it, and return to par scores were good in that 290 to 310 bucket we just looked at. Stephen Fisk at 6,900 looks really good. We got, let's see. Yeah, EVR has been popping for me like all year, and I refuse to play him. So yeah, do what you want to do with that. Adam Svensson looks pretty good, very consistent. I would be pretty comfortable with him making the cut here. Danny Walker as well, surprisingly good off the tee, considering the events he's played well in, and approaches about average. So not the worst thing at 6,600. Let's see if anybody else in the 6K range checks any boxes. I will say, I think Jackson Suber was popular last week. Or maybe it's just in my echo chambers of people saying they're going to bet him at 250 to 1 or 500 to 1, whatever he was. I will say there's a big discrepancy between strokes gained off the tee and spectrum off the tee. You can look here. So strokes gained off the tee for Jackson Suber, he is losing 0.38 strokes. Spectrum shows he's gaining 0.67. So there's somewhere over the last few events where he lost a lot on a couple tee shots, and it's unfairly weighting him down. So I think Jackson Suber is a really interesting play this week, where one, our spectrum number likes him more, but also we know that the driving accuracy is not a big factor. So yeah, Jackson Suber 6,400 is very interesting. Let's see here. Back to rank. You got to watch some sample size. Like Bronson Burgoon checks a few boxes. He's only played 3 rounds. I don't know what he played. I guess the Amex and missed the cut. Go look, actually. Haven't heard that name in a while. Yeah, he played the Amex and missed the cut. His numbers look good, though. He must have barely missed the cut. Yeah, pass. All right. So that should pretty much do it. And just kind of glancing through this list one more time. Yeah, honestly, it's definitely a different list of guys in the last couple weeks, which is nice to see. But yeah, I think this is an interesting week to get a little bit creative. Unlike last week, I think it was super bland. We knew what the driving distance buckets were. We knew everybody's going to hit the same shots off the tee, where they're going to have the same approach shots into the greens. I do think this is an interesting week where you can kind of like dive in a little bit deeper using the driving IQ. I probably glossed over that too much at the start of the show, and I think there's actually more benefit than we thought. So I think that's it, guys. What are we at? 45 minutes, a little bit long. Sorry about that, but hopefully that helps. Like I said, there's plenty of ways to skin a cat, and then diving in a little bit deeper than just running. This is my overall ranking. Like it just don't do that. Please don't do that. Don't get your overall ranking and think that is it's not a model in that predictive sense. You're basically just trying to see who grades out the best across multiple categories. And then it's your job to take that further and figure out who's actually the proper plays. So hopefully that helps. We'll be doing more. I'll do a Spectrum video this week and make sure that's up. I'll use Xander as the example, and I'll use some other players, recent examples, to kind of give you an idea of where Spectrum comes in to be such a big benefit, especially depending on the courses that they played recently, like Valspar or the Players, where penalties were plentiful. So, all right, guys, best of luck this week. Let's see. Projections should be up Wednesday morning. Late start today. They take a while to run. They take several hours to run those projections, the way we process the hole-by-hole scores. So Wednesday morning projections should be up. Ownership will be up Wednesday, and my article will be up Wednesday afternoon, we'll call it. So best of luck, guys. If you have any questions, you can hop in the Discord and, just post it in the PGA DFS channel or PGA betting channel. And that's it. Best of luck. Enjoy the tools, and we'll talk to you later. See ya.